The Dancing with Depression podcast is brought to you by CAS-CM, where CM stands for Content Matters, because content brings people together. Welcome to the Dancing with Depression podcast, a space for honest conversations about mental health without the pressure to show up polished or have it all figured out. I'm your host, Adam Turner, and I think I've done a great job not being polished or having things figured out, and I plan to prove that to you once again today. If you've listened to the podcast before, you know I've been open about a variety of experiences in my own life. So this won't come as a surprise or feel especially unique, but it's one of those moments that really highlights why clarity matters. There was a time when, as a grown man, I wasn't taking a shower, even though I knew I needed to. And the hardest part wasn't the shower. It was not understanding why I couldn't make myself do it. From the outside, it might have looked like laziness or not caring. From the inside, it was confusing, embarrassing, and heavy. I knew what needed to be done, but I couldn't understand why my brain wouldn't let me move forward. And without clarity, that space gets filled with self-judgment. What's wrong with me? Why is something so simple so hard? So as you're listening, I want you to ask yourself something. Can you think of a moment when something that used to feel so simple suddenly felt impossible? Maybe it was getting out of bed, returning a text, making a phone call, or as like me, taking a shower. Or maybe it wasn't you. Maybe it was someone you love, and you couldn't understand why they were struggling with something that seemed to be so basic. If something comes to mind, just acknowledge it without judgment, because moments like that aren't failures. They're information. What I didn't have back then was language. I didn't understand how depression can impact executive functioning, how it can slow processing, drain energy, and make even small tasks feel overwhelming. And once you understand that, everything changes. That understanding doesn't magically fix things overnight, but it changes how you talk to yourself. It turns shame into context, self-blame into self-compassion. And that's why today's conversation about testing and evaluations matters so much. Because understanding how you think, learn, and process the world can be a tremendous asset. Not a label, not a judgment, but a framework for moving forward. I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Lauren Goldstein, licensed psychologist and owner of Goldstein Services. Dr. Goldstein brings a strengths-based, neurodiversity affirming approach to testing and evaluations, helping people understand why certain things feel harder and how to move forward with clarity instead of criticism. In this episode, we'll talk about what testing and evaluations actually are in real human terms, why they're so valuable, common misconceptions, what strengths-based and neurodiversity affirming really means in practice, and practical takeaways you can walk away with, whether you're just curious or considering your next step. So if you've ever wondered whether understanding yourself better could bring a sense of relief, this conversation is for you. Dr. Lauren Goldstein, welcome to the Dancing with Depression podcast. I Really appreciate you being here today and sharing your expertise. I want to acknowledge you've absolutely earned every right to be addressed as doctor, and I deeply respect that. At the same time, if it's okay with you, I'd love to just call you Lauren as we chat. I consider us friends first, and I'd like this to be a conversation just to feel relaxed, informative, and curious if you're okay with that.
Absolutely. And thanks for
Awesome.
having me.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. So I've talked a little bit about kind of the background, but can you share just like a little bit of your professional background? I know it's covered some years and some different areas within the mental health space.
Sure. Well, I've been a psychologist for about 20 years now, and I've worked in a variety of educational and mental health settings. But currently, I work in private practice, and my focus is on testing and assessments for children, adolescents, and adults.
Okay. And so, like, at a high level, like, what's the purpose of the professional testing and assessments?
So people often come in with a lot of questions. They want to know why life feels harder for them than it seems to for other people. Or there's something just, they're not sure what's going on. There's been a change in their life, or maybe it's been a lifelong struggle, and they're just trying to figure themselves out. So the purpose of an evaluation is to answer those questions. An evaluation is about understanding, not about labels. And it's about finally having that understanding of the why behind someone's experiences. So instead of just guessing or reacting to symptoms, testing looks at the full picture, how someone thinks, how they learn, how they feel and cope, so that they can move forward in the right direction.
That's something I wish I realized like 20 years earlier. And so what does that process typically look like from the start of reaching out to someone and then the process all the way to the feedback and what you provide?
Sure. So I think of the process as someone's story unfolding. It starts by just really listening to someone's history, their struggles, their strengths, importantly. We have a conversation so I can learn about your story, your concerns, and what you're hoping to get out of the testing about the process. So the testing gives us more details itself once we have all that background. So testing might include something like questionnaires, further interviews, problem solving activities, tasks that are specifically designed to look at specific skills like executive functioning. And then the most important part is the end, which is the feedback. And that's where everything comes together and finally makes sense for someone. So we go over all the testing results, what it means specifically for you, and then recommendations. And it's usually during that feedback part where people finally, take that deep breath and say, "Oh, that makes so much sense." Right?
Yeah. When I did the ADHD test, that kind of was the thing that kind of put things together for me,
Mm.
the things that I was feeling, things that I was thinking, and really just added a level of comfort to say, okay, well, now that makes sense as to what's going on. And so, with regards to whether it's, adults or parents seeking evaluations for their children, what are some of the more common reasons that folks would be reaching out for these assessments?
Sure. So really there's a variety of reasons and there's so many different reasons that people would reach out. For children, parents often will call and say, something just isn't connecting. I know my child is smart and capable and kind and has a good heart, but something isn't working. Or I love my child, but I'm really struggling to connect with them. Or there's, power struggles or school refusal, big emotions going on, or just plain exhaustion. Everyone is trying so hard and there's little or no relief. So, an evaluation can help stop that feeling because you're no longer guessing in the dark. You're understanding what it is that's going on. And the same thing is true for adults. If adults, are feeling stuck, like they've been trying the same thing over and over again, or trying a variety of things and nothing is clicking, and they're not able to move forward and not finding the support that they need, that's when they come in saying, I've tried everything else. I don't know. Something isn't right. Or they've done research on their own and they've learned about some different areas of their life that might be impacted that they didn't think about before and realizing maybe there's something more going on here that I want to understand. So they'll come in and say, I want to better understand myself or my child. Because when we don't have that understanding, it's suffocating. We don't feel like ourselves and we don't understand what's happening or why we can't move forward. So, for many people, an evaluation isn't about, wanting a label. It's about wanting that relief. It's about having that clearer understanding so you can stop guessing and start moving forward in a productive way.
Awesome. And so for those, people that sometimes buzzwords turn them off or scare them or whatever, and they hear things like evaluation process and so on, how do you help them through that narrative and kind of in a supportive rather than intimidating way? Because we all have our own ideas of what that means. I jokingly, like, if I hear evaluation, I'm thinking these things are going to be attached to my body and all of these things. So what does that process look like so that we can kind of set them at ease to take the next step?
You're right. The words we use can be really intimidating. Assessment testing. A lot of people come in, they have or have a history of test anxiety. It's scary, right? So the first thing I tell people right away is that this is not a test that's pass or fail. It's not like school where you come in, you get a grade. There's no grades here. And for much of the testing, there's not a right or wrong answer. It's about learning you and learning how your unique brain works, however that is. There's not one right way for a brain to work. So however your unique brain works is great. That's what we're going to help uncover. So my goal is for clients, whether it's a child or an adult, is for them to feel respected and seen and heard, not judged or tested on. And then the other piece is really taking the time to connect with a client before we begin the actual testing process, making sure that they feel safe and that they feel that they can be themselves. And that's when we really get the most meaningful understanding, is when people are genuine and authentic in who they are.
Awesome. As far as the adults, like, considering testing later in life, what usually prompts that decision from your experience?
Oftentimes it's a breaking point. So someone will say something like, I've got my whole life coping and it's been fine, but now it's just not working anymore. So they have that breaking point. Or everything's, just harder than it needs to be or that I think it should be. There's also those big life moments and transitions. So things like a transition to parenthood, a change in job, burnout. All of those life transitions can expose challenges that were always probably there, but easier to hide before or easier to cope with before.
Gotcha. And so really those last two things you mentioned were really personal to me because I got tested for ADHD at the age of 49. And so it was interesting because, like you said, I was coping with things and kind of getting through, but there was a disconnect as to what was really going on, like what was happening. And also finding out that certain things are interconnected, right? So maybe the ADHD was attributing to depression or anxiety or something. And so having that clarity and treating the root of something, it was very, very helpful. And kind of to that point, like the value add that ADHD or autism testing provides for an adult, who's spent years feeling out of sync without those clear answers, the testing and evaluation will help with that process, correct?
Absolutely. I think you've articulated perfectly what so many of my clients experience and what they say when they come in. Depression and anxiety can be in and of themselves, an issue that people struggle with, but they also can be a sub issue of something else, right? So when something isn't right, depression and anxiety often surface, and it could be due to something else. And if that something else is not being addressed, then you're just spinning your wheels addressing the depression and anxiety.
Yep.
So we need that missing piece, and we need that so that everything else makes sense, all our past struggles make sense, and then we can guide treatment in a way that is more effective and compassionate.
Gotcha. Yeah. That definitely a big part because I feel like, based on the person, based on experiences and everything in between, it can be slightly different for everybody. So to have that clarity again is priceless, really. And so the evaluations that, you do, you're helping the individuals move from that uncertainty to clarity. How specifically or even high level do the evaluations help you in that process? Like, what is it specific that you're getting from those evaluations?
So uncertainty is very heavy and it's exhausting. So we want to help clarify what's going on to reduce that. So what an evaluation does is it helps connect the dots. It can name patterns that people often blame on themselves or personal failure. People come into feedback sessions, often really tense, and they walk out with this weight lifted because it's not that everything is fixed, but everything finally has an explanation or even a name. So clarity replaces that confusion, and that alone can be incredibly healing. And it can help set us on a path for the proper supports that work for your unique brain.
And I feel that's directly connected for me when I realized that I wasn't the only one that was dealing with anxiety and depression. There was a sense of connection. And so I can see now taking that a step further with the evaluations and now saying, okay, now I know why it's happening and what's going on. And to your point, now you can put together a more catered and specific kind of plan to work through that moving forward, which has to be feeling like a heavy lift of weight being removed from your shoulders. Like, I know I carried it. That's for dang sure. uh, and so, what does that next step look like after you've gotten the results?
So I think of the results as a roadmap. So once we have that roadmap, we can figure out the path we're going to take. When we don't have that roadmap, people will try everything and then blame themselves or blame their providers if something isn't working. But it's that, moving from the throw spaghetti at the wall method that most people start with for some reason, and that rarely works and usually makes a mess, and moving towards having this clear roadmap where your choices are clearer. So you're going to choose this kind of therapy, these types of work accommodations, these specific school accommodations. You're going to choose strategies or work with someone who can help you find strategies that actually work for how you're wired. So the roadmap tells you the direction to go in, what's going to be most effective for you. And it's not that this is it, once you have this roadmap, you have to follow it because like with anything, everyone's a little different. And as you explore different strategies, you might find some work and some don't, but you'll have this guideline, this guidance, if you will, of the direction to move in and what's most likely going to be effective. And then you can tweak it from there.
Yeah. And I like the idea, and I think people have to be reminded that there isn't this like magic thing that once you've identified maybe the root issue that everything is going to be perfect and whatever. It's kind of like really just narrowing down to be more specific of what's going on. And like you said, some things are going to work and maybe some things have to be adjusted, and that's okay. That's the norm within this space. And I've experienced it, and I'm sure most people have. But what it does is it zeroes in and focuses a little bit more, and correct me if I'm wrong, but would find a less time to find that kind of help as opposed to having such a broad and not having an understanding of what the heck's going on. So you can zero in on it.
Absolutely. So if you're trying a number of different strategies that are solely designed to help you with your depression, for example, and you're ignoring the fact that you have this underlying ADHD, well, then you're exploring all of these strategies that may not address what the problem is that's causing your depression, right? So, like, if you're having trouble initiating tasks because you're so depressed and you're in bed all day and you can't get your work done, and you're using these strategies to help target your depression and still not making progress, then you find out you have ADHD, which is, one of the main, symptoms, if you will, of ADHD is, initiating tasks and being able to get things done because of that executive functioning difficulty. So if you're not addressing that with ADHD, then all of the work you're doing to help with your depression is not accomplishing the goal that you want, which is to get your tasks done. So we really have to understand ourselves, the full picture of ourselves, to understand what's going to work.
Perfect. I use this, and again, I know everybody doesn't go to a chiropractor and stuff, but like I kind of use it as an example of, maybe you have a sore neck, right? Or a sore lower back. And so you go and you treat that, right? But it always keeps coming back, only to find out that really the root of the problem was in your feet, which was making it a challenge for your other parts. So if you now know that you need to treat your ankles and your feet, it starts to relieve all of the other issues that you've been dealing with because you're overcompensating. So that's perfect.
Perfect example.
Nice. So what are some of the most common misconceptions people have about testing and evaluations?
Yes, there are a lot, aren't there? So people don't understand necessarily because, like we talked about before, they have this idea about what testing is or, evaluation. They carry these negative connotations, these words. But a big one about testing is about labels, or that, we're going to be finding that there's something wrong with you. And many people will have this fear that an evaluation is cold or clinical or judgmental. And that's not something anyone wants to experience. But the truth is that the emotional part is often the relief aspect, not the, feeling judged aspect. It's that relief that they're not, lazy or broken or failing. So a good evaluation is really about understanding, not about judgment.
I feel like I kind of know the answer to this based off of my personal experience, but I want it to be said by a professional instead of just my opinion. And that is there ever a wrong time to pursue an evaluation?
So there's definitely no perfect time for an
Okay.
evaluation.
That's
So therefore, there's no necessarily wrong time. If someone's asking the questions, if they're feeling stuck, that's reason enough for an evaluation. And an evaluation will meet people where they are. So, most people don't come in saying, oh, everything's fine, just evaluate me.
Mhm.
That's not the norm. But that actually, some people do come in and say, well, I'm not having any current concerns, but I want to better understand myself and understand my strengths. Because when we have a better understanding of our strengths, we can capitalize on those and we
Mhm.
can use that to our advantage. So it doesn't have to be that something is necessarily wrong, though the great majority of people do come in when they are feeling stuck or feeling like things are just not going well in their life. So there's definitely no wrong time. I've seen people, as young as, toddlers and preschoolers, and I've seen people into their 60s and 70s who are really just trying to get a better understanding of themselves. Or, a lot of the people I see who are older will say, I've gone my whole life, I've struggled my whole life. Things are just, never quite lined up. And I just want to know and better understand. And just, I've read some things. I think there might be something. I just want to know and understand. And that sometimes is just the relief people are looking for.
Absolutely. An age doesn't matter. It's really, your experiences, and sometimes it's just ready to have that clarity. And so that's important. Now, the one thing I've learned in this space is that there are sometimes words and stuff that I have no clue what they are and what they mean. But, when you talk about like neurodiversity affirming approach, like what does that mean in terms that I might understand?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I just, as a side note, listening to your podcast is really helped me recognize how much jargon sometimes we use
Yes.
that we don't even realize. I mean, it's part of my everyday vernacular, so I don't even realize how much I use until I was listening to a couple of episodes a while ago and realizing when you're describing things like, oh, people don't know what those acronyms mean or, what the terminology means. So it's been really helpful listening to you and hear that perspective.
Good.
So back to your question, though. So neurodiversity affirming basically means that I don't see people as having a problem that needs to be fixed. I look at the whole person with a unique brain. And we think about what are the things that drain the person, but also what lights them up. So what are the challenges someone is facing, but also what are their incredible talents and strengths? And the goal is to build a life that works with someone's unique nervous system, not against it.
Mm.
So neurodiversity affirming means that, we treat differences as amazing qualities that come with challenges and strengths. Differences aren't treated as defects. They're part of how someone uniquely experiences the world around them. And that's basically neurodiversity affirming. It's this strengths-based approach.
I thank you for that. And the reason why that's kind of hitting me is I think society has done a unfortunately good job of leading people to believe that, you focus on what needs to be fixed or problems
Yeah.
or whatever. And I can say from my experience, like sometimes it feels like somebody's trying to turn a negative into a positive that's not real. But in this
Mhm.
situation, I can share from my personal experiences that there are strengths that I've identified and that they need to be recognized and used to help you with things that maybe you're struggling with, right? So I like having that clarity of what exactly that means because, again, we're so trained to be like testing, evaluations, what's wrong, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So not only identifying the strengths, but also leveraging those strengths and recognizing them.
And you hit on a really important point that I wanted to just bring out, which was that the idea here is not that we're turning a challenge on its head and saying, oh, this is really a strength, even though inside you're struggling with it, which feels fake and feels like you're forcing something that's not true. And in some ways, it can be invalidating. Like, no,
Mhm.
you don't understand. This is really a struggle for me. It's not a superpower. So it's not about just flipping the way you think about a challenge and thinking of it as a strength. It's about finding the things that are actually your strengths
Mm.
and using those and not trying to pretend a challenge is a strength because that's just invalidating and nobody likes that feeling. We want to work on the challenges, but the things we want to point out as strengths should be the things that are actually your strengths. And everyone has them. Sometimes they're hiding because you have so many challenges and it's hard to see them,
Mhm.
but they're there and we want to pull those out and use those to our advantage.
Nice. I like that. So you had mentioned like understanding how people think and learn. The question I guess I would formulate there is like, why is it important for people to understand how they think and learn, not just where they struggle? And does that go back to the strength part?
It can, yes. So once you know how your brain works, how you think and learn, you stop fighting it.
Mm.
So support works best when we build on our strengths. When people understand how their mind works, they can advocate for themselves and they can make choices that fit for their brain. So you're right, it does go back to your strengths and using those to be able to build the support system that you need.
Okay. And so now that folks have a better understanding, they're like, okay, maybe my guard's down a little bit. For someone that's still maybe not there with regards to, if testing is worth it, what would you want them to consider?
I would say one simple statement, which is if you've spent years trying to fix yourself, maybe it's time to understand yourself instead.
That's perfect. And so, what's the one thing that you wish more people understood about the value of the evaluations?
I think simply that evaluations are not about judging or labeling, and they're not designed to change who you are. Evaluations are to help you finally see yourself clearly. It's that simple.
Okay. And then if somebody is thinking about taking that first step forward, like, is there anything that they can do to kind of prepare themselves or their kids for the process?
I tell families you don't need to perform, just show up as you are. So come with a curious mind, not thinking about, performance as the goal. And for kids, and even some adults, I'll tell them everyone's brain works differently. And my job is to better understand how your unique brain works.
Okay. And then for folks that maybe have been listening to the podcast and, a little bit more focused or familiar with therapy, how is an assessment different and why might it be helpful for someone dealing with anxiety or depression?
So therapy helps you cope. Assessment helps you understand. So for some people, the anxiety or depression piece is the smoke, but not the fire.
Mm,
It's the result of an underlying issue. And assessment helps us find that source. Where's it coming from?
gotcha. I think we kind of touched on this, but I think it needs to be addressed. Like, there's a lot of people, whether it be from resource availability or knowledge, but they try to push through their symptoms, right? And how do you know when it might be time to just pause and really take a deeper look inside instead?
I would say when effort keeps increasing, but you're not seeing the progress.
Mm,
So, you could hear yourself saying things like, why is this still so hard? Why am I not making progress? And that's often the signal that something deeper needs attention. And an evaluation can help you uncover what that is.
okay, that makes sense. And then, like, someone's still feeling anxious, depressed, or both. How can that assessment help sort out what's really going on underneath?
It helps us ask better questions.
Okay.
So, is this mood or is it chronic overwhelm? Is it attention struggles or is it sensory issues? Is it an unmet need? We really want to figure out what's going on. And so an assessment really just helps us ask those better questions, even in therapy. It helps guide your therapeutic process to know what it is that's going on so we can best figure out what the help is that is needed would be.
And you alluded to this earlier where sometimes, you could be focusing on the wrong thing. What are some things that can look like depression or anxiety on the surface, but they actually need a different kind of support?
There are lots of things. So ADHD, autism, learning differences, trauma, stress, sleep issues,
Oh, wow.
even medical conditions. There's lots of medical conditions that wear this mask of anxiety or depression. So treating that surface level anxiety or depression alone often doesn't work because you're not addressing one of these other issues as the underlying source. And to be clear, there may not be one of these underlying sources. Anxiety or depression could be the underlying source. That could be everything is stemming from this emotional difficulty that you're having. But oftentimes, there are other comorbid or co-occurring issues going on that we need to address and help guide us in our treatment approach.
Gotcha. Okay. And then, so now once somebody has the assessment results, like, how is that used to change, or is it used, I guess, to change like therapy or medication support that they're currently receiving?
So treatment can become more intentional and more personalized. So instead of trial and error, that throwing spaghetti at the wall method we talked
Mhm.
about, it becomes more tailored to fit you.
Perfect. Can you share an example of how, like, the right diagnosis completely changed someone's path or maybe helped things finally click for them?
Yeah. So, people often spend years feeling stuck and then say, this explains my whole life. From there, it changes everything, their self-talk, their relationships, to things like therapy and supports. And Adam, you're the perfect example of this in your life. But I've seen this many times myself. And I often don't get to hear how people are doing months or years later, because after
Mm,
the assessment results and the feedback, then they take that and go back to their therapist or they move on to other things. So I don't often get to hear how it has had an impact on them later. But once in a while, I do get an email or someone reaches out. And that has happened where, I can't, of course, share too many details for reasons of client confidentiality. But I did have a client a few months ago who reached out after years after an assessment that was done and had told me how the minute they walked out of my office, and I didn't know this, like I said, until years later, but the minute they walked out after getting their feedback, they felt like their life could begin because now they had this new understanding of themselves and they no longer had to mask, which is when someone kind of suppresses part of themselves to fit in. So they no longer had to mask who they are and could stop playing a role and had a better understanding of who they were themselves without being in this masked role. So it's always, a pleasure to hear back from past clients and hear how well they're doing. But it's one of those times where you can really see that the understanding, in this case, it was an understanding of their autistic brain, which they did not know about their whole life. This was an adult. And recognizing that they were masking their whole life, that brought that sense of, I can be myself. They weren't aware of it, but they could start peeling away that mask once that awareness came into focus. And that's an incredible weight that's lifted. And it's, of course, incredibly validating for me, too, knowing the impact that the evaluation had.
Absolutely. And I can tell you, when you're masking, it is draining. It is, you just feel wiped out. And so I can definitely see the relief that could be felt immediately. As you said, walking out the door, it's like, oh, finally. And so for those that are still feeling stuck or discouraged and, tired of trying these different things that haven't worked, what do you most want them to hear right now?
I want them to hear this. You are not broken. You may just not have the right explanation yet, and that explanation matters.
Awesome. That's beautiful. I love that it's not long-winded. It's what it is.
It's very simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so for folks that are, struggling with anxiety or depression or any sort of mental health challenge, like from your perspective as a professional that's been in the space, that have seen a lot of things, like, is there like a practical tip or a coping tool that you could recommend for those moments when things feel heavy?
I would say the most important thing is for each person to develop their own toolkit, if you will. So there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to any of this. Everyone's brain is so unique. And I could laundry list 20 different strategies, and not one of them might be what works for you.
Mm.
And in any given moment, you might even have a strategy that you like to use, but in any given moment, that strategy might not work. So we each need to develop our own set of tools that we can draw from. So in that moment where we are feeling that anxiety kick in, or we're having a low mood, or whatever it is that's going on, we have some resources that we've already kind of tried and established as working for us, or maybe working sometimes, and we can choose from that. And then if one doesn't work, we can throw it away and try another one. So there's not a quick tip I can give that would be useful for the great majority of listeners, because there's not one that just works for everyone. It's really about finding your unique tools that work for you.
Absolutely. And I want to kind of add a little bit of flavor to that, because one of my tools that work when I'm feeling anxious is I will grab Bobby's hand to kind of soothe me a little bit. And everybody doesn't have the access to Bobby's hand to soothe them. So in that realm, but there are variations of that. And so having a couple of different options and knowing what works for you is definitely been helpful for me. And I encourage people to have that toolkit and be able to reach into it and get it when you need it. Lauren, thank you so much. Like, as I've said, like being 49 and having that ADHD testing, which was never, ever, ever mentioned to me, like never a thought. And then me not realizing that that could be the cause or attributing to the depression. And so it's just very comforting to know as opposed to guess or think. And what you're doing and how you help people is powerful. And the way that you're able to articulate the value of it, it's so helpful. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your, contribution to the space. And I really do genuinely believe that this is going to help a lot of people that have been struggling, that aren't really sure what to do, and want to get a better understanding of themselves. And using data that's specific to you is always encouraged. I come from a background of digital marketing, and we talk about it all the time. There's the big picture, but then there's the smaller, more honed in. And I think that this really it captures what's going on. I do like to say or ask if there's any questions you have for me that you want to ask. I'm happy to answer if there's anything that you want to ask me.
So, is there one thing that you can pick out that has changed in your life since getting the ADHD diagnosis after years of being treated for depression and anxiety? What's the one thing that the ADHD diagnosis added to your understanding of yourself that said, oh, I'm going to make this change in my life, or now I understand this one thing that's been going on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing that stood out for me was that clarity. Because like you said, when you go back and you look, and I had a long time to look back, recall saying things like, I'm not good at test taking, right? Or I'm not organized or able to complete tasks, and a variety of things associated to that. And that really dictated my thought process in what I was capable of, when in reality, I was just as capable as anybody else. I just didn't know how to navigate that space. Coupled with it then allowed the professionals to adjust the medication that was focused more on the ADHD, which was kind of a blessing because I never really wanted to have to, quote unquote, rely on medication, but I understand that it helps in certain areas. And when you're addressing the actual problem or challenge or whatever, it's provided me a better quality of life, right?
Mm.
And I think that's the best way to put it. Now, I'm not saying that it's, everybody's unique, everybody's different, but it was also kind of like fascinating to have looked back and said, man, I did struggle because of all of these things. And maybe and that's really a big component of why I was so excited to talk with you, is that, some folks might be able to identify earlier on that they need some clarity. I didn't know about it. I had no clue. We didn't talk about it in any setting that I was in, whether it be home or work or anything. And so everything for me was really by trial, personal experience. And, I'm thankful that I was able to link up with somebody that at least said, hey, have you ever considered? Have you ever thought of? Have you ever been
Mhm.
tested for? And I hadn't. And it wasn't pressure. It was just information.
It's great that you are sharing this with your listeners too, because hearing from someone who's been through this experience, who has the personal knowledge to share about what you've been through is, I think, incredibly helpful for people to, like you said before, not feel alone, not feel like they're the only one going through some of these issues, and just connect with another human who is experiencing some of the same things. So that's
Yeah.
great.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I can't thank you enough. I appreciate everything, and I will certainly be in touch, as you're aware. And if questions come through from folks, we'll connect again. But thank you for your time. Thank you for your contribution. And like I said, it's been really insightful for me, and I think that a lot of folks are going to benefit from this as well.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
As we wrap up today's conversation, I want to leave you with a takeaway that Lauren articulated so clearly. Clarity has power. Clarity doesn't magically fix everything, and it doesn't erase challenges, but it can shift how you understand yourself, reduce the weight of uncertainty, and help you move forward with intention instead of guesswork. That's exactly what the thoughtful testing and assessments are designed to provide. Understanding, direction, and a clearer path forward. If today's episode resonated with you or helped you see yourself or someone you care about in a new way, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to the Dancing with Depression podcast. Doing so helps this information reach people who may be feeling stuck, overwhelmed, or quietly searching for answers, and make these conversations easier to find when they're needed most. And if you'd like to learn more about the testing and assessments Lauren provides, you can contact her by visiting www.goldpsychservices.com. And remember, when it comes to depression, take the lead. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Dancing with Depression. There's a saying that hindsight is 20/20, which is often used to describe the phenomenon of being able to see things more clearly after they've happened. With that in mind, I encourage you to reflect back on past experiences in an effort to better understand your now. Also, I invite you to share with me your comments, thoughts, or personal exposure to depression. You can email me at dancingwithdepression@yahoo.com. Until next time, keep moving forward, and when it comes to depression, remember to take the lead. The Dancing with Depression podcast may include discussions of suicide, self-harm, trauma, and emotional distress. Listener discretion advised. This podcast shares personal experiences and is not a substitute for professional mental health care. If you need immediate support, call or text 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. For non-crisis help and resources, contact NAMI at 1-800-950-6264.